Um, this, for those of you who weren't around last week, this presentation came together on very, very short notice. Larry found himself in a situation, unenviable situation, where he had an opening and just didn't seem to have very many prospects at all to fill it on very short notice. And I casually happened to mention that I have some presentations in the can from the National Scouting Historical Summit, and that have been sitting around for 5 years, almost 5 years now. And and as soon as I said that, I realized I had made a terrible error and committing myself to that I was going to have to pay for in some fashion. And but it was too late, and on with the show. So here we go. So that gave me an opportunity to go back and look in my own archives. These presentations are buried in a Dropbox folder. I don't think I've looked at them at least in 3, maybe 4 years. And I pulled this one out, and this one was one of my favorites. Gave 2 sessions of it on the last day of the National Scouting Historian Summit. And I think we have a few people that were there at the Historian Summit. For the majority of you that weren't there, it was really quite a spectacular event. It was not linear or one-dimensional at all. At any given moment, there were 4 different presentations going on in different venues at Philmont, and participants had to actually sign up for a learning track depending upon what their area of interest was. We had some people that were just authors, and their primary interest was in publishing and how to deal with Scout history related to publishing. And we had 4 total tracks that people could sign up for. Now, far and away, the most popular track was the historians and people that had museums, Scout historians who were interested in getting information out to the public and displaying information and all the things that were related to that. And this was a course that went on within that track, and other tracks could take it as an elective for their track, and they did. It was sold out. It was really popular at the time. So when I pulled the presentation out last Tuesday and I went through it, of course, it's impossible to go back at an old presentation and not see the mistakes that you made, not see the things you left out, not see the jokes that you told that went flat and you got no response from, and all of that kind of stuff. You go back to it and you go, oh yeah, I remember. Yeah. So naturally, through the week, I tinkered with it and updated it and made some corrections and so forth. And I'm glad I did. And what we're going to see there is the original presentation with some updated corrections as we see. So we get into it, and the marketing that Larry and Johnny put out was pretty accurate relative to small spaces. The vast majority, if not all, Scout museums tend to be in very small areas, and they tend to have more stuff than they have space to put it into. And this is a common element. I know for people that haven't done it, you probably wonder, oh, am I ever going to have enough stuff to put together in a museum or something like that? And it turns out it's just the opposite that's true. It turns out you have way more than enough stuff to put into a museum. But the issues and the problems related to that are trying to put things together in a format that has an appeal to people beyond Scout collectors. And by and large, the people on the call right now and our group as collectors, we tend to see things historically as collectors, And there's a lot more people out there than that are interested in the material on some level if they could be attracted to it. And so to deal with the public, to deal with young scouts who come along, or potential young scouts, or family members, which is a big thing in the BSA, to try and expose them to some of our stories that we've had over the last 110, 14 years, whatever it is. That there are some challenges related to that, because, as we're going to see, most of us come from a background of displaying Scout memorabilia at traderies. And there's a certain style of presenting Scout memorabilia at traderies. We all know it. We either do it, or we've been there, or both. I certainly have. And that style really reflects in the way of typically frames and display cases we set up on tabletops, and we put our best stuff into frames and so forth. And then when we make a museum, because of our background, we tend to draw on our experience of how we do it at traderies. And to deal with the group of individuals who are interested, that are outside of traderies, and that's most people, there are some modifications that are worth talking about. And then, of course, dealing with the simple issues of how do you deal when you don't have enough space to put all the stuff that you want to show people. Jumping in and getting started with this, that if you look at Wikipedia, which I did this morning, I looked up Scout museums, and I did a search on Scout museums, and there was a lot. There was one site on Wikipedia, and this is what they said. It's worth reading. Throughout the world, and as soon as I read the first 3 words, I realized, oh yeah, that's right. There's places besides Canada and the United States. And I never really gave much thought to that. But there are many, many museums related to scouting in one fashion or another, exhibiting our heritage of scouting, and for the purposes of education and enjoyment of society. And then there are online versions of museums. As you can see on the bottom of the red circle, check this out sometime if you're curious about it. Just like I did on Wikipedia. They have a list that goes on for pages and pages and pages of main scouting museums in other parts of the world. And it's in alphabetical order, of course. So Africa starts up on top, Canada's near the top, and the United States is back on the back end alphabetically. And when I took a look at this list, I was really surprised to see the list. The list goes on for like 3 or 4 pages, of which the United States and Canada only represent about half a page of that, or 3/4 of a page at best. And the vast majority of Scout museums are in other places in the world. As we take a look, and of course, my area of exposure and experience is in North America. So that's the perspective that I have to work with. And one of the things that I've noticed is there's an element of scouting museums that approximates a death spiral in a certain way. And I don't mean that as a criticism. I mean it as a reality, that the museums are out there. They're run by our members, who are by and large senior citizens. That isn't true across the board. They've assembled collections. They put their collections out for people to see. Last week we had a great presentation about the new museum, or the museum going on at Camp Treasure Island, and issues related to that. And for all of this sake, and even the National Scouting Museum at Philmont itself, which I had a lot of involvement with when they moved over to the new building about 4 or 5 years ago, and then the OA exhibit when that was redone and restarted, is they don't get a ton of exposure. The museums that are at camps tend to do pretty well just because campers are coming through. So they have a built-in audience, and the audience when people are in camp and not out on the trails and so forth. They're looking for stuff to do, and the trading post becomes one thing they like to do, of course. And then the museum is also something that they also like to do. But their parents aren't there, other family members aren't there, the public's not there. So as the number of scouts has shrunk, so has the number of people interested in scout museums, at least in our country. And so that presents some challenges to make our museums, if it's possible to make our museums, attract more individuals who aren't necessarily scouts or scout collectors. And there are some tricks to doing that. We're going to cover them. So what could cause something like this? Well, from a designer's standpoint, and I've designed my share of museums now in my scout career, and these are the two words that are killer for us in terms of what's going on with our the way we go about designing things. And we're going to talk a little bit about that and how that factors into how we set up our museums and what can we do about it. The psychologists say that clutter makes some people feel uncomfortable. It makes them feel stressed, anxious, depressed, brought on by chaos and claustrophobia. Now, I certainly relate to clutter in my own way. I have certain rooms in my house that are cluttered, and I'm constantly fighting to unclutter them at different times, and I manage it somehow. And everybody has a different tolerance to clutter. Scout collectors are around clutter constantly in terms of being with their scout collectibles, not only at traderies and so forth, but devoting rooms in their house, basements, so on and so forth. And it's just something that we live with. I don't know if scout collecting attracts people that are resistant to clutter, stress, or it's some other thing. But the general public, a lot of people in the general public have a strong reaction, emotional reaction, physical reaction to clutter. And then, of course, claustrophobia. Claustrophobia elicits the same responses that clutter does. And it has a few extra ones that are not too helpful. It elicits fear in a lot of people or being trapped. And those fears and feelings can be brought on by being in cramped spaces and being in crowds. So, I mean, this is right up our alley. Guess what happens with what we do? Tight spaces, crowds. And so that comes back to who are we? Now, these are just shots pulled off of some of the resource material that we had at the time. It happens to be, we see a banner in the back that says Coosa Lodge. I know we have our Coosa Lodge friends on here. But this is not specific to Coosa Lodge. As a matter of fact, I think this event was a multi-lodge pop-up museum or exhibition. And Coosa Lodge just had a few tables along with everybody else. But I thought that was kind of humorous that banner was back there. But this is us. This is us at the Traderie. And this is a familiar sight to almost everyone on the call, if not everyone. And look how we have things set up. We have tabletops that have, in this case, nice royal blue drapes on them, which is nice. And then we have frames and displays set up on the tabletops. The space between the rows of tabletops can tend to be crowded in many situations. And so that intensifies the feeling of crowding at the peak moments of a traderie. Scout museums tend to not necessarily have those peak moments, but even so, things get crowded in there because we're always looking for extra space to put some of our great collectibles. And so the question becomes, are there things we can do to counteract the negative effects brought on by scout museums and events held in small spaces? That's the challenge for us. So from a design standpoint, the starting place is a blank square or rectangle. The starting place is a piece of paper, and a piece of paper that we can make drawings on. And we're going to see what we can do with those drawings and why we would want to have them. And so I recommend for everyone who's putting on an exhibit, whether it's a weekend exhibit at the Scout House or it's a Scout museum that's established, drawing out the floor plan and figuring this thing out before you assemble it is absolutely key. One of the challenges of putting on the NOAC museums was that they were pop-up museums. They were meant to last 6 days, even though months and months and years went into the planning of them. And materials had to be shipped to the NOAC location from all over the country. And then all the pieces had to be assembled. And the only way to possibly accomplish something like that was to draw every single thing out the way an architect would design a house. And from building, you don't build a house by starting to put up a wall and then try and figure out, well, maybe we'll put a window here, maybe we'll put a window there. That's just not a prescription for a successful result. And the same goes with our exhibitions. But they're simple to make, and they don't need any drafting skill. I think step one is to draw that rectangle on a piece of paper. If you want to use graph paper, that's fine. I've used graph paper. I do this in the computer. It doesn't matter what level of sophistication you're using to make a drawing. Hand drawings work great. Make a couple measurements and sort of put it out to scale. And then step one is to put in your fixed objects. Now, fixed objects, of course, would be an entrance door and anything else that's in that room. There are some rooms we go into or some museum spaces where the entrance door is the only fixed object, but you can certainly have a window, one or more windows. I've encountered that situation many times. And you can have fire exits going out of doors. So you can have multiple doors. And you can also have, while it's not drawn on this blank square, you can have posts or columns holding up ceiling fixtures or penetrations into the space or collapsible accordion doors running across the space that pull in one direction or another and close it off. So you got to have that stuff first. We did the big museum we did for the centenary of the OA had very complicated ceiling structure with domes and different things. And the ceiling structure ranged in some places from 8 feet to 16 feet. And in that very complicated space, in addition to having a floor plan, we actually had to have a ceiling plan that laid over the floor plan so that we could see how much vertical space we had as we were laying things out. None of us are typically ever going to get into something that complicated. And the next thing that I want to share with you is sight lines. You've got your space, you've drawn in the fixed objects. They're not moving anytime soon. And now you've got to draw in your sight lines. Now, this is a new term for a lot of people. So let's take a look at it. A sight line is the furthest unobstructed distance you can see from the place you are standing. The further the sight line, the bigger your space feels. So if you're trying to create the illusion of bigger space in a small space, sight lines are going to be your number one strategy for designing your space to maximize your sight lines. All of us are sitting at computers right now, including me. If you take a look around your office and you can see a certain distance into certain corners and other places, the sight line is very small. The closer the sight lines are to where you're standing, the more cramped the space feels. Now, these are rules. I didn't invent these rules. These are standard rules from architecture and design applied to, and they do apply to every situation, not just ours. Establishing a distant sight line at an entrance creates the illusion of space. So on the assumption that everyone's going to enter your museum space from one door, and I've seen situations where there's two entrances, but let's talk about simple one-door entrances. As soon as they walk in that door, your primary sight line is the absolute number one thing that's either going to make them feel comfortable or start to raise their blood pressure, depending upon how much tolerance that individual has for being in cramped spaces. Now, when we take a look, this is a panel view of the 2015 NOAC Museum, one section of it, and before opening on one day. And the green arrows represent the sight lines. And so you see it at the front door. So you see the distance that's created at the green arrows. Super critical to be able to do that. If, for example, though, if the arrow only pointed to this frame right here, right in front, that would be a super cramped sight line. And that would make a lot of people feel queasy. May not make you or me feel queasy, but we're a special group. So we take a look at this museum, and on a lot of levels, a beautifully designed museum, nice displays, but it's and well put together, by the way. But it's your typical traderie construction. You've got tabletops, you've got frames sitting on tabletops, and of course, in a couple spots, we have another frame. At the traderie, there might be a display case, sitting on those tabletops in front of the frames, where you have your dupes and the stuff that you're selling or the stuff that you want to show. So I would call this typical traderie layout. The problem with this layout, unfortunately, is that this area, the center island, which seemingly is very necessary in this space, and the space does benefit by an interesting light above it and a soffit. So it's got a lot of neat things going for it, but still this table in front is so in your face when you walk in the room that it knocks out the sight lines. The best sight line we have actually goes out to a fire exit here, and the most distant corner of the room, which is behind all these frames, is completely blocked. Now, for those of you that may be having a little bit of trouble imagining just sort of how this works, as you bring things closer to the front door where people are entering, and you shorten the sightline distance by doing that. These are our sight lines here. Here's the long one over here. Here's the shortest one right here, right in front of you. That's a killer right there. If there were a way to move around this and get this sight line someplace else with a long distance, boy, oh boy, would that have a tremendous result in this particular museum. But this is kind of how it works. And so, look, we're bringing the text now. We're bringing it closer to us. Look what that does to our ability to understand the space we're walking into. If that still doesn't make sense, let's make it bigger. Let's block out everything right in front of us and see how that impacts what we're able to process with the space behind. So back to our drawing. Drawing in the sight lines are pretty darn easy. Take a pen or a pencil, go from the front door and go to the furthest points in the room. Now notice we're talking about drawing in the sight lines before we even draw in the exhibits. That's an order that most people don't think of doing. We're going to put the exhibits in a way that promotes the best sight lines, not the other way around. And so no matter what your space, you can make it look and feel bigger if you follow these rules about sight lines. Let's go back to our space for Coosa Lodge over here. And again, they're not the only lodge. There were other groups that were here in this space, but they had the best banner. So we'll call it the Coosa Lodge. And you can see with, it looks pretty good so far. We're standing at the front door or a front entrance, and we can see all the way back to the back room. And there's no obstruction right up front. So that's pretty good news from a design standpoint right there. Again, this is tradery style exhibits. But sometimes it's the people that are the obstruction into the space. So look what happens to this beautiful space when the tradery or museum opened, and it fills in with people. Oh, we didn't think of that. Oh, typically, what do we think of? We think of what's in our frames. We think of what we're showing. We don't think of, wow, what happens when people come into this space? Then what? And you can see everything falls apart. The people in the room are blocking the sight lines, although the banner helps. It does draw our attention across the room. At least we have that going for us. So we have to start considering people. And when we consider people, we have to decide on traffic flow through the museum. Now, people are going to enter the front door, and you're going to have some choices as to where those people go. Sometimes we don't take advantage of that, and sometimes we kind of screw it up, that we don't give them any particular choice to go. They just enter the room, and then they go willy-nilly into the space from every direction, and then come out the same way in a cross traffic with no organization at all. That form of traffic flow can be improved upon. Museums don't set things up that way. Other types of museums don't do it that way. What they do is they direct the traffic flow. So people come in, they go in one direction, and they keep moving until they go out. And even if it's through the same entrance. And so we need to pick a traffic flow. Now, generally speaking, we'll set a room up to be counterclockwise. In other words, imagine yourself up at the top. You're now walking in this door. You're facing down here to the back of the room, and you're going to make a right turn. You're going to make a right turn, and you're going to follow a circle around the room, and you're going to exit back out that door. So there's not going to be any cross traffic in your museum. This gives you a number of advantages. It gives you the advantage of actually being able to lay out your exhibits in an order that you want people to see them. Now, if you had a museum, why would you want to do that? Tradery doesn't operate exactly like that. In a tradery, still traffic flow can be a little bit different, but you're going from table to table, looking at your friends and collectors' tables, and it doesn't matter what order you see them in. But in a museum, if you have an order that people are seeing the exhibits, it allows you to tell a cohesive story as people move through the museum. So one example would be, oh, well, let's lay out our exhibits in chronological order, for example. Or let's lay out our exhibits going from tenderfoot to eagle all the way around, or whatever the deal is with what your museum's about or how you're starting to show that. There's nothing magical about counterclockwise. I think we do that because the majority of people are right-handed. And while you're sitting at your computer right now, staring at the screen, if you're right-handed, put your right hand out. And the direction that your hand goes out is the turn that you're most comfortable with making when you walk in the front door. Now, this isn't necessarily true for left-handers, but left-handers are used to living in a right-handed world. And so the issue about setting up the traffic flow relates to not crossing other people and not crossing over your own body. Once you've established your primary sight lines and your traffic flow, your next step is to eliminate unusable sight lines. In the room that you're in, some sight lines may be better than others. Certainly, if you have a fire door, you're going to have to keep that open. We've encountered that situation so many times where we can't put anything in front of a fire door. So we essentially have a sight line right to the fire door, which can be a lot of distance. But the problem with that is we can't hide the fire escape. And so people stare at a fire door when they walk into the museum. So just over the years, we've kind of learned little tricks like that. If you have a sight line that's headed towards a fire door, eliminate it. Get it. Don't do that one. There are strategies for dealing with that. And now that you have your sight lines and your traffic flow, you are in position to lay out your tables. Now, if you've drawn your drawing to scale, roughly to scale, it does not need to be exact, just rough it out. And you can get a rough dimension on your tables. The tables come in certain sizes. And one of the best tricks for drawing this out is on a piece of graph paper to draw out some little tabletops to scale that you can cut out of the graph paper. And then with a little piece of tape behind them, you can lay them on the drawing of your room. And you can play with different arrangements. Notice in this arrangement, and this is a typical arrangement you would run into, enter a rectangle from one side, and then you're going to have exhibits down one side. You're going to leave the fire door accessible. You're going to have to cover the window to get an extra 2 tables in here. And then you'll have an exit table coming out the side. And then you have this island in the center. Here's the problem. Take a look at this one table right here in the island, and it's obstructing one of your primary sight lines. See that? Okay, so we'll have to figure out how to do it. Now, in these slides, what you're going to see down on the bottom here is you're going to see how many linear feet of display you have in your floor plan. And we do that just by measuring the tables across and determining how many total inches of tables we have, for example. And then that becomes our linear space for displays. And that's the telling thing. How many linear feet do you have for your displays? That will help you judge one plan against another. So another thing that you don't think of is, well, what if we kind of juggled the tables up a little bit and didn't make them on a grid? Then what could we do? And so we kind of turn some tables to each other, so people are coming in at different angles and not just down a line. We take one of the tables out of the center, which reactivates our secondary sight line. And then we have this kind of curve that goes with the traffic flow. Now, in this configuration, because we lost a table, we ended up losing 3 linear feet of display space. Maybe you can tolerate losing 3 linear feet. Maybe you need more linear feet than you've got, and you're trying to find ways to get more linear feet. And so going back for a second, this looks very nice and orderly when you look at it on a piece of paper. This looks very unorderly when you look at it from a drone view from the ceiling on a piece of paper. But when you're in the room, it doesn't look that way. It looks like you have display spaces facing in a variety of different directions that help you with the traffic flow. Now, there's an alternative to this to gain space, just in general. And we use door panels. I'm going to show you how we do that. And we call this going vertical. And here's how it's done. These are vertical panels, not tabletops. with frames on them. They're vertical panels that provide the same or more linear display space, but don't take up as much room in a small room, which the effects of this are tremendous. Let me tell you how you do it. I went to Home Depot website this morning, got these figures. You can buy these hollow core doors. That's what we do. Hollow core doors, and the size that you want. Look down here. We get the ones that are 30 inches by 80. That is a good standard size. Doors are 80 inches tall, 6'8", and it's one of their standard sizes. We've tried all the other sizes. We tried 18 by 80. We tried 24 by 80. We tried 36 by 80. They're either too narrow or too wide. 30 by 80 ended up being the perfect size for doing a whole museum out of these things. And they come in two finishes. They come primed in a white finish, or they come unprimed in a wood finish. I highly recommend, if you're going to do this, that you get the primed ones. Don't get the wood panels thinking that your displays will look nicer on a wood grain background. Your frames and your spaces won't look nicer on a wood framed background. They will look nicer on a white background. And pre-priming saves you all that trouble. Also get the blank door panels that don't have a knob hole cut into them already. And Home Depot sells them this way. This morning's price, $71.46 per panel. And you go pick it up. And then we're going to put these panels together with a 4-inch hinge. We use the 4-inch door hinges because the 4-inch over the 3-inch, the 4-inch door hinge provides us with 4 screws on each side, not 3. And it comes with the screws, of course. And that makes it stronger. You can get these in various finishes. We like the ones that are satin chrome. We've even done the stainless steel ones, have a very nice look with curved corners, but they're more expensive. Your door hinge for this project is going to run you $8.35 per hinge, and you're going to need 2 per 2 panels. Remember, if you're putting 2 panels together, you're only using 2 hinges to do that. So that's going to run you about $17 for the hinges. And once you do that, you can start to put panels together in any configuration you want. It's so easy to create spaces and pathways and do different things to see your exhibited material with this technique of door panels hinged together and bent the way that you want to bend them. And then when you stand them up, they stand up by themselves. It's even this bifold door panel. We wondered about this when we first started doing it. Will 2 doors set up in a bifold just like this, will it stand up by itself or get knocked over? And what we found was, the answer was, it never got knocked over. We've never had a 2-panel display in any of our museums get knocked over. It turns out this is a very, very strong, stable configuration. And then, of course, the larger connections where you're using more panels are even more stable. And so you can make something like this. I think in the picture alone, we're looking at 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 panels, 4 of which are almost in a straight line. You might ask, well, you have a blank panel on the end over here. Why do you have a blank panel on the end? And the answer was, well, we had such a long run of straight panels. We thought we would just put a panel on the end to hold the end up so it didn't fall over. And we didn't put anything on it. And so if you're going to play around with this door panel idea and start to move away from or traderie style setups, start with that center island. And now take a look. Take a look at what we've done. We took the tables out of the center island and we replaced it with not 4, but 5 door panels in the center island. And that cleared out the sightline space from the front door. And it created more space in between where people go. And that's good. And it maintained the fire exit. And now we're back up to 63 linear feet. So this configuration created a lot more space in the room and not at the expense of our linear feet of display space. How do you hang frames on these panels? Or, if you're like, for most of us, if we're displaying, we have frames and we have our patches in the frames. How do you do it? Particularly if you're not bifolding them or trifolding them on the tabletop itself. And so here's how you do it. Here's the hardware you need. We get this frame hanging cable hardware. That's how we do it. And this one comes from, I can't remember, it was wallhanging.com or something like that. And you can see they sell these kits that include these adjustable frame hangers that screw in along a cable. They're really cool. And then they hook to a hook here. We have a different hooking system that I'm going to show you that we like better. So here's your hardware right here. The hardware involves either getting this style of hanger for your hanger wire for your frame, or this style. They both work out okay. And it's a nice looking piece of hardware, super easy to use. And then get a cable, and you're going to use 2 of these per picture, or picture frame. The reason why is you want it to be level. And with one cable, it can get cockeyed, and you don't want it to be cockeyed like that. You want to keep it level. You can get the stainless steel cable, or you can get the white coated nylon loop cable. Both of them work depending upon what your aesthetics are and what you're trying to accomplish. And then what we do is we get these cheap L hooks at Home Depot. A package for 100 of them is a little over $12 this morning when I looked. And so they're very, very inexpensive. And what we do is we screw in these L hooks to the top of the door. And then we just loop the loop over the top, and it hangs down. And this part goes where the wire is on your frame in the back. And presto, you've got yourself hanging frames. Great look. It's a really cool look. Let's go back. It's a really cool look. There's no question about it. Okay. And if you could do a center aisle, you could do a whole museum. There's no place where you have to stop. As a matter of fact, there's hardly any place in a museum where you need to set it up on a table. There's a couple of exceptions to that, but they're very, very few. You could go panel doors throughout, but you don't have to do it all at one time. That's the beauty of it. You could do one exhibit. You can try it for one thing. If it's successful for you, go back and do another one and start to make the transformation over time. Once you've made the transformation, you'll never go back. The other thing is that these door panels allow you to deconstruct the museum and bring it all down and take it back in the van or truck and put it back in your garage or basement and take it out the next time. And we call that version of a museum a pop-up museum. It's not permanent. It doesn't stay there all the time. You're going to set it up for certain circumstances, and you need to be able to deconstruct it. And when we look at this now, and we look at all the space that's been created inside this tiny little room by not having tables and not sacrificing an inch of available exhibit space across the panels. This makes the room look larger. It makes the room feel larger. It counteracts claustrophobia. It counteracts crowds. It's good for the museum. And since we're talking about space for people for just a second, let's talk about people for just a second. We're back to our room for Kusa, and we've got people looking around. And we talked a little bit about this last week. I'm going to go over it again. There are two types of museum goers. Two types. One type of, I'm taking these two guys out of the center. One type of museum goer is the so-called close-up viewer. Now, the close-up viewer is characterized by the type of individual who walks very close to the tables and points at the frames from an arm's length. That's a close-up viewer right there. Or this guy back here, his head is over the table and he's examining the stuff in the frame. And we call those close-up viewers. Now, it turns out at a traderie, traderies are almost uniquely set up for close-up viewers. And the people that attend traderies tend to be close-up viewer kind of people. So that works again in a traderie situation where people are close up to the frames. But there's another type of viewer walking through a museum, and that's the walk-by viewer. Now, what I've done in the picture is I've taken out the close-up viewers and added back the walk-by viewers. In case some of you were wondering, what does a walk-by viewer actually look like? Or do they actually walk into these spaces at all? And the answer is yes, they do. And the walk-up viewer, I love this one. His arms are crossed and he's about 8 feet away and he's scanning the scene. Okay? He's not looking at your great flaps or your medals or your pins or whatever. He is in the middle of the room and he's scanning the scene. Same with this guy up front, walking right down the middle, not getting involved with the crowd. This is your walk-by viewer. Now, the walk-by viewer is rarer in scouting traderie circumstances. We're not used to them. But in the general public, walk-by viewers are the majority of viewers in the general public. If you're looking to attract family members, young scouts and kids, other people in the community, the public, into your space, the space needs to accommodate the nature of the walk-by viewer as well as the close-up viewer. And we'll talk about that. Walk-up viewers represent a larger, or walk-by viewers, larger percentage of the people in your museum than the close-ups. The problem with our frames tends to be that our frames are filled with small objects. I collect small objects. I collect flaps, okay? I have even smaller objects in my collection. I collect from jamborees. I collect pins and medals, for example. And so these are very, very small things. And so we tend to fill our frames up with small stuff that can't be seen from the center of the room. And when we do that, we're actually drawing people into the crowd who want to see anything. And that creates problems because crowding creates claustrophobia. Let's take a look at this museum and the way that it's set up. When it's empty, it's a real nice looking setup. Nice rows, again, tables, blue tablecloth, rows, and then over here we have photographs, panoramic photographs. Some of you who have seen some of my presentations, either on the Cracker Barrel or on the videos, the YouTube videos that Larry has put up from them, some of you have heard me make fun of panoramic photos. That we're all in them, we've all seen them. It's part of scouting, And there's nothing to drive anybody crazier than looking at a panoramic photo where you have all these tiny little heads that are 1/16 of an inch tall, and you've got hundreds of them in a panoramic photo. Okay, that's part of what we do. But the case should be made clearly that look at all the small stuff. And we go over to the displays and look at all the small stuff in the display cases. And so that can create problems in terms of the layout of our museum. Rows of tiny stuff become dysfunctional when museums are filled with people. At a traderie, it's to a large extent, it's a part of a traderie. There's no getting around that. I want to talk about this concept for just a second. I want to talk about white space. White space is defined as the term for the amount of background that is not covered by text, images, memorabilia, or stuff would be your white space. White space can also be said to be the buffer or the breathing room between the stuff to see and the background, and does not necessarily have to be white. So for example, we're looking at black lettering right now on a white space, and what we can see pretty clearly is the white. But if the background, let's say we're tan, for example, and we had black letters on tan, then the tan becomes, in a way, the white space. So that's kind of how that works. When we don't have enough white space, that creates clutter and confusion and crowding and eye fatigue. And viewers can get maxed out. Even people that want to see all the stuff in the museum, at a certain point, they hit their saturation level. It's all a big blur. You might have been in that circumstance yourself. Here's a rule that you can follow. The best frames and exhibits are about 50-50. They're about 50% white space, and they're about 50% stuff. For those of you that weren't sure how that concept worked, try and sort this out. Too much black space, not enough white space. There we go back. Here we go forward. It becomes the more crowding, the more incomprehensible is the stuff that you're trying to show off. And so here's a nice display of frames. They got nice wood frames, got some great patches in there. And just everything is just so jammed together. It's like at a certain point, it's impossible to see. What stands out when I look at this, sitting right here in front of my computer like you are, I see the two Order of the Arrow sashes first. No surprise. They're on white. They're white space all around them. That's why we see them first. And the rest of the stuff, it's like, whoa, what's this? How can I sort through this? So when we're designing our frames, let's try and uncrowd them a little bit. And that presents some problems when we try and uncrowd things because we're short on space as it is. Here is another version of it where we have crowding in the frames, but we have white space around the frames. And so now the frames themselves can be looked at with buffer zones in between them. And it gives us an opportunity, and our brains an opportunity to process what we are seeing. Again, some people are better at this kind of stuff than others. Some people are more tolerant of crowding and so forth than others. Everyone's different. Everyone's different. And you know where you're at with this. You know where your family members are, who in your family can't be around clutter and who can. And you know all that stuff. So it presents some problems. Now, if you say, yeah, I see what you're showing, I get it, but it's easier said than done to do what you're talking about. I have too much great memorabilia to show. I need every square inch of floor space and frames to show it all. This is a very common thing I hear from our scout collecting friends, and I have to admit, I certainly have felt this way myself at different times. So there's nothing wrong with it. It's a natural reaction. So solutions. Show less stuff. Now, I know that I'm breaking the cardinal rule of what we want to do in a museum or an exhibition. Show less stuff? What are you talking about? Show less stuff. I have great stuff. But maybe you need to show less stuff and more people could actually see what you're trying to show and it would work better for you and them. Maybe you could go through your memorabilia and only pick out the specific items that illustrate a particular point or theme, story you want people to know as a result of spending time in your museum. And we have a word for that, and it's called editing. And maybe some of our frames need to be edited a little bit. So you might say, well, what do you mean by story or theme? I thought the point of a scout museum was to show the best of my scout collection. Here again, this is a legitimate concern from scouts that show their stuff, collectors that show their stuff. And well, where are we at with that? What does that mean? A possible solution? Not really. That is the purpose. Showing your best scout memorabilia is the purpose of a traderie. The best museums have a simple theme or story. For example, let's say I was doing a museum about my old camp, Emerald Bay, and I picked a simple theme. Simple. Don't get too involved in this. My simple theme might be a history of and influence of Camp Emerald Bay. And so my job then is to figure out what fits and what doesn't. Items to include, well, of course I'm going to put patches in, but I'm not going to put varieties. I'm going to put in some neckerchiefs that represent things. I would put in some photos if I have them. The bigger the better, or if I can blow them up. Maybe I have a place for some honor camper pins from the camp, or I have some articles about the role of the Order of the Arrow at the camp, or this is always a good one. Celebrities. Is there any celebrity connection anywhere to your camp, your council, something that you've done? One of the members of scouting in their true, and it doesn't need to be a Hollywood celebrity. It could be a celebrity in business, or celebrity in profession or teaching or anything. But people like to hear stories about people, and they are attracted to any story that outlines someone famous that they should know about. I go through, some of you know that I spent a lot of time in Maui. And if you haven't been there, you wouldn't know that there is a 6-panel display down one of the long corridors where all the gates are for one of the pilots. And it's done in panels, just like we're talking about. And it was a pilot who started flying in to Maui back in the 1950s, and that they named the airport after. And they have some blown up photographs of him, and it's really interesting to look at. It doesn't have any memorabilia on it per se, other than the uniforms that he's wearing at different times in his career and life as it progresses from when he was a young pilot in his late 20s until he retired when he was about 70. And it's a great and simple exhibit. But you say, I want to show my collection of square merit badges, you say, in your Camp Emerald Bay collection. And then what about my Jambo collection? And I don't want to leave out my first flaps from Montana. And don't forget my Eagle medals. And by the way, I have some great camporee patches shaped like South Carolina. What do you want me to cut out? Well, let's not forget This was a history of Camp Emerald Bay frame, okay, an exhibit. So stay true to your story and theme, whatever it is. You could show an old scout uniform with an eagle medal on it or a merit badge sash belonging to a former camper. Blow up his picture as an example. All the other stuff, like the flaps from Montana, hey, you may have the best flap collection from Montana there ever was, but save it for the traderie, not this exhibit. You don't need to show everything you've got. There's an old Chinese saying that I like, and I'll share it with you. I try to follow it, but I don't a lot of the time, but I'll share it with you anyway, and it goes like this. He who tells all he knows usually tells more than he knows. And I think there's a lot of truth to that. Sometimes we try and tell too much. And I'm probably the number one offender. I can be guilty of that. But you might say, wow, who would be interested in what you're suggesting? If I do a museum like that, it won't be interesting. It's never going to work. And my answer to that is, really? That is not what the Order of the Arrow found out at the 2015 and 2018 NOACs. Both of those years, the museum was the most popular event at the entire NOAC. And they had over 10,000 people in 2015. And it was more popular than the opening and closing shows. So I'm not so sure that if people aren't seeing enough patches, that they're going to be bored or disinterested. We might be, but I don't know if everyone's going to be that way. But you need one more solution before we call it a day over here. And I call that the museum designer's secret weapon. The secret weapon are graphics and skins. They tell more about memorabilia without the memorabilia. They make your museum look professional. These are actual exhibits. This one was from the 2015. They liked it so much they wanted it back. Notice, it's a 3-panel exhibit on flaps. And there isn't a single flap patch on it. Remarkable. Now, there's some pictures of some cool flaps. And notice how the pictures are some of them are really big on the left-hand side. This really big panel is meant to draw people in to the center panel so that they can read our text blocks, which are bigger than typewriter size letters, a lot bigger. And then they have one shirt in a frame. So they have some big stuff, and that draws them into the little stuff, and it's done with 2, what we call skins. How do you do skins? I'm going to tell you in just a minute. But take a look at this problem that we had in the museum. Bill Topkus put up his pin collection, and he wanted to put up almost all of his pins at that time. He has more now, of course. And he said to me, Jeff, what can we do with this exhibit? These pins are as small gets. And who's going to stop and look at this? And of course, we talked about, well, anyone that is interested in pins would stop and look at it. He says, but I want to reach more than that. I want to reach more scouts, more collectors that are just interested in pins. What can we do? And I said, well, let's put up a nice big skin on one of the panels next to the pins. Something that you could see not only from the middle of the room, but across the room if you had to. And we'll blow everything up. We'll take the little stuff, the tiny stuff, and we'll turn it into the big stuff. And then people could see the skin as part of the exhibit, and be attracted then to come and see the little stuff. And it worked reasonably well. So this is a really good strategy when stuff gets so small and so crowded. Here's how you get the skins. The skins are made from foam board, and we've gotten them from various places. I think when I looked it up today, I was looking at signs.com on the web. And the foam board or foam core signs, they offer a perfect blend of professionalism thanks to their lightweight and they're compact, and there's no problems carrying them to your next presentation venue or multiple locations, which is true. It all worked. They're an excellent choice for meetings or informing, in this case, customers of specials and indoor signage. Here's the site, signs.com. And so we take a look, we go there, and what do we see? They have a place, foam board signs. And I like to share what things cost, because a lot of times people look at this stuff and they go, wow, you're really talking about something, that's not easy for me to do. And how much does this stuff cost? And so, okay, well, let's take a look at what it costs. Most of the time when we see the cost, it's not as bad as we thought it was going to be. Just like with the door panels. Maybe all at one time you can't do it, but you could do one exhibit now, one exhibit later, if you have a plan. The size we want, 30 by 80. So signs.com is going to make up a skin on foam core to the exact dimensions of our panel. So when you put it on the panel with tape, and the kind of tape that we use is called command tape, that you could get anywhere. I think it's a 3M product. I'm not sure I put a picture in of that. Some of you are familiar with it. And it's perfect because you can get it back off, but it stays on there. And we've done hundreds and hundreds of these panels in high traffic, high use situations, and then popped them off at the end. And everything worked out just fine. Here's some other information that they have. This is their promotional material about what they can do. They talk about printing both sides. They talk about direct printing. Up here at the top, they say prop it on an easel or use Velcro tabs or command strips, 3M command strips to put on your custom sign. And it's available as an accessory option from them, or you can just buy this stuff from wherever you buy stuff, Target or Home Depot or wherever. Everybody sells command strips these days. And we get these professional looking door panels. This is how you make your skins. You go to their website and you can either upload a picture that you have and they'll print it off of that, or you can design your own online, which is the way that I like to do them. I use PowerPoint. I design 30 by 80 panels in PowerPoint the same way I'm doing this exact presentation that I'm showing you. And the design options are infinite. And if you send them the PowerPoint slide, they print it exactly the way you did it. It's mind-boggling and it looks really good. I haven't used the search templates. I haven't found that very useful for me. You might find it useful, but I like to make custom panel designs when I make those panels. Very easily done. You send it to them, you know the cost, and they have them in a day or two. And then sometimes they ship these things free to the location that you're setting up, or to your house or wherever, or the scout office or wherever you want to set things up. And so in conclusion, we've covered a lot of ground. We did it really fast. It seems if you want to impress your scout collecting friends and peers, then set up your best collectibles at a tradery. If you want to educate and inspire scouts, their families, and the public, set up a scout museum, even if it's temporary, even if it's only at the scout house. And if you want to be really slick about it, set up a scout museum and use your collectibles to illustrate a good story. Don't just throw collectibles at people and expect them to know what you know about these collectibles. The people in your family, the public, little kids, they don't know what a 219 F1 is. They have no clue, right? But they do know a good story when they hear it. And with 219, and my apologies in advance to our Florida friends on the call, but 219 itself has a very interesting story. It was a story of a bunch of scouts that got a little bit too rowdy, and airmen, and they got on the wrong side of their scout exec, and their scout exec pulled the plug. And so that council did not have Order of the Arrow for another however many years because of that. Now, guess what? To a lot of people, that's a more interesting story about some bad scouts, renegade scouts, than looking at a 219 flap. And so if we start to think more like the people that are looking at our stuff than just us and how we view our stuff, we're on the road to making better exhibits, better museums, and even better tradery tabletops, utilizing some of these rules. I'm Jeff Morley, and thank you for joining another amazing episode of Pat's Tales Unknown.
Jeff, I have a question about the lower, if you use a 30 by 80 panel, the text shouldn't be any lower than what height from the floor, in your opinion?
Well, in general, we set our frames. They end up being the determining factor. So we don't want to put our frames and the edges of our frames too close to the top of the panel, because that looks weird, right? So we need to accommodate the space, a minimum amount of space for the frame off the top of the panel. And then that becomes the determining factor of where you can set your text blocks, Tim. Okay. We've run into certain situations, however, as you might expect, that we needed more room for text information than we were able to get in that scenario of putting our frame up on a panel. And where we evolved to over time was saying, in that circumstance, the skin is the perfect solution. Now, with the skin, we're designing the entire panel at one time, and we can put the objects and the text around it in the places where we think it's most suited. Obviously, if you're starting to put text below a 36-inch line on a door, you're starting to get to the point where people have to bend over uncomfortably to read it. And so that's not going to work either. But it's a perfect environment for the skin.